Okay, I hope I'm audible to all my students who are attending this online lesson for the Cambridge International AS Economics course. In this particular lesson, I'm going to start with a new concept within the macroeconomy module. This is the concept of unemployment. Now, in the previous online lessons, we have talked about circular flow model, we have talked about national income statistics, we have talked about the concept of aggregate demand and aggregate supply, and recently we have also talked about economic growth. Now, in this particular lesson, let's quickly start with some important terminologies we use in unemployment. When is a person said to be unemployed? What is meant by an economically active workforce and an economically inactive workforce? Okay, what is unemployment rate? What is employment rate? What is participation rate? So in this lesson, I am going to introduce the concept of unemployment by looking at some terminologies within this particular module. Okay, I request all students who are watching this online lesson, please make notes. Remember, when you are making these notes, it obviously helps you a lot in your revisions after the lesson. Okay, and it also helps you in writing good essays. Okay, so let's quickly start with the discussion of the unemployment concept within the macroeconomy module. So I'm just writing the main heading for completeness. We are looking at Cambridge International Education, AS Economics course. Okay, within this, we have been looking at the macroeconomy module. And within the macroeconomy module, we are looking at unemployment. The concept we are covering is unemployment. Okay, so first of all, let us see when does unemployment occur. So our students can write unemployment occurs when people, it occurs when people who are willing and able to work, when people who are willing and able to work cannot find a job. So it means that these people are willing to work, they want to work, but they couldn't get a job. Okay, so I can further elaborate. This does not mean that all people who are not working, this does not mean that all people who are not working are unemployed. So just because someone is not working, you can't say that that person is unemployed. A student might prefer to do a master's or a PhD. We can't say that that person is unemployed. Someone might choose to retire early in age. We can't say that that person is unemployed. Remember, unemployed are those people who want to work, they are able to work, but they couldn't get work. However, there are certain people who might willingly prefer not to get a job. They might prefer to go for further studies, or they might prefer to retire early. So it means what we can say is not all the people who are not working are unemployed. So just because you are not working, I can't say that you are unemployed. Okay, so hoping students have understood this. I can further write, for example, there are children who are too young to work. There are children who are too young to work or may wish to pursue or may wish to pursue further studies and some adults retire. These cannot be called unemployed. These cannot be called unemployed because they are not looking for work. They are willingly not, they are willingly deciding not to work. So someone who is willingly deciding not to work cannot be called unemployed. Okay, so now hoping students have understood this. So I am now erasing the initial portion of, and let's look at what is meant by economically active and economically inactive workforce. So let me erase this portion off. And let's write the next note: economically active versus inactive. Economically active versus economically inactive. So I can now write that people who are not working, people who are not working and trying to and not trying to find employment, people who are not working and are not interested in finding a job are said to be economically inactive. They are said to be economically inactive. They are not a part of the labor force. They are not a part of the labor force. That means the labor force will not contain economically inactive people. I repeat, economically inactive are those people who are neither working nor they are trying to look for work. They are not working and they don't want to work. For example, kids, for example, older people. They don't want to work. Okay? So they are not, technically, they are not a part of the labor force. Labor force only includes economically active people. That means those people who are able and willing to work. Okay, so if I erase this portion of people who are both able and willing to work, people who are both able and willing to work, whether employed or unemployed. Employed are basically those people who are willing to work and luckily got a job. Unemployed are those people who are willing to work but couldn't get a job. But both of them are willing to work. So they are a part of economically active population. So people who are both able and willing to work, whether employed or unemployed, are said to be economically active. They are said to be economically active. And are therefore a part of the labor force. They are therefore a part of the labor force. Okay, so remember students, economically active includes both employed and unemployed. Whether you are employed or unemployed, you are willing to work, you want to work. As long as you want to work, you are economically active and you are a part of the labor force. As long as you are not working and you don't want to work, you are economically inactive and you are not a part of the labor force. So I hope all students have understood this. Now, erasing all this off, let us now concentrate more on the labor force. Okay, so erasing all this off, students can now write the labor force. The labor force, so I can write that the labor force in an economy, the labor force in an economy is defined as the total number of workers. It is defined as the total number of workers who are available for work. They are defined as the total number of workers who are available for work. Okay, so again, I can say that the labor force includes both employed and unemployed, because employed are also available for work and luckily got work. Unemployed are also available for work, but they had to face bad luck, they couldn't get work at that time. So I can say, therefore, labor force is the sum of both employed and unemployed. It's employed plus unemployed. Okay, so I can say, therefore, it the labor force refers to the labor force refers to all people. It refers to all people who can contribute to the production of goods and services. It refers to all those people who can contribute to the production of goods and services. Okay, so hoping students have understood this. Now let us see that if I talk about the size of the labor force of a given economy, what all factors it depends on. So students can write the size of a country's labor force. The size of a country's labor force depends on a wide range. It depends on a wide range of demographic, economic, social, and cultural factors. Okay, such as, let's say, the school leaving age. It depends upon the age at which you graduate from high school. Okay, so your labor force depends upon all these factors. Now, countries can have different ages at which people graduate from high school. Okay, so school leaving age, I can write another example would be number of people who remain in full-time education above the school leaving age. Some people want to do an undergrad for 3 years or 4 years. Some people then further go to do a master's for 1 or 2 years. Then some people also prefer to go into further research and do a PhD for 5 to 6 years. So I can say number of people who remain in full-time education, not part-time, full-time. Number of people who remain in full-time education above the school leaving age. Above the school leaving age. Okay. Then the size of the labor force also depends upon the retirement age. In some countries, people retire at the age of 60 years. In some countries, it is 55 years. Different countries or different industries have different retirement ages. A cricketer might retire at a very early age of, let's say, 40 or 45. Okay, so different industries call for different retirement ages, and different governments also have different norms for retirement. Varies from country to country. So the size of that country's labor force also depends upon what's the retirement age fixed by the government. Okay, and it also depends upon very important factor, proportion of women who join the labor force. Proportion of women who join the labor force. If a country has a higher proportion of women who join the labor force, that country will obviously have a more higher labor force. Okay, so if I sum up, so this whole paragraph basically talks about the fact that labor force includes all those people who are willing to work and are available for work. They include both employed workers as well as unemployed workers, because both of them have the potential to contribute to production of goods and services. It's just that employed people are lucky enough to get a job, unemployed people are still looking for a job, but both are willing to work. And when you talk about the labor force of a given country, it depends upon a lot of demographic, economic, social, demographic factors, economic factors, social factors, cultural factors. Okay, so it depends upon the school leaving age. It depends upon the number of people who remain in a full-time education after they graduate from school. Okay, it depends upon the retirement age as fixed by the government or different industries. It also depends upon what's the proportion of women who are joining the labor force. All these factors are going to influence the size or the magnitude of a country's labor force. And obviously, since these factors might differ from country to country, the size of a labor force is also going to vary from country to country. So, hoping students have understood this. Then, let me further write a note on the top. I am erasing the initial portion of. Let me write a note here that a country with a higher number of people, a country with a higher number of people of working age is likely to have a larger labor force, is likely to have a larger labor force than the one with a smaller number of people of working age. With a smaller number of people of working age. Okay, so when we talk about a country, okay, it is very clear that more the number of people in the working age bracket, more will be the labor force of that country. A country with more people in the dependent population, which is children and the elders, will have a lower labor force. That country where more people lie in the working age bracket will see usually a higher labor force. But not always the case. This is not always the case. It is not compulsory that more the number of working people, more the labor force. It is usually the case, not always. So I can write that this is usually the case. This is usually the case but not always. Usually, one can see that more the people in the working age, more the labor force. But again, the example I just took, it may be possible that someone is in the working age and decides to do a PhD. Okay, and someone who is in the working age but voluntarily decides to retire early. Okay, so both these can cause the relationship between working age and labor force to be not direct, I can say. So let me write this point. Let me make our students write this. This is because the size of the labor force. This is because the size of the labor force is also influenced by the labor force participation rate. The size of the labor force is also influenced by the labor force participation rate. Remember, students, the size of the labor force not only depends upon how many people are there in the working age, the size of the labor force also depends upon how many people are willing to participate. It may be possible that an economy has a lot of people in the working age, but many of them don't want to participate in working. They want to do a PhD, or they want to retire early in life and enjoy their life. So I can write this. Let me first of all define labor force participation rate. So in red color, I'm just defining labor force participation. So labor force participation rate refers to the percentage of the total population. It refers to the percentage of the total population of working age who are actually classified as being the part of the labor force. Being part of the labor force. So labor force participation rate means what percentage of the total working population is actually a part of the labor force. That means what percentage of the total working population is actually willing to work. I repeat, labor force participation rate is going to refer to what percentage of the total working population who is willing to work. Those who are willing to work are automatically a part of the labor force, whether employed or unemployed. Okay, so I hope all students are clear with this. So we can now look at what are the reasons for a given country to have a lower labor force participation. And they're exactly what I just spoke a few minutes back. If I erase the initial paragraph of, let me erase the initial paragraph of, I can write that there are reasons why the labor force participation may be relatively low in some countries. May be relatively low in some countries. First reason would be that it might include a higher participation rate in the higher education. A country might have a higher participation rate. A country might have a higher participation rate in higher education. You might see a country where a lot of youngsters in the working age actually don't prefer a job. They want to study more. Some people go for a doctorate degree. Some people go for a postdoc and so on. So these people are willingly sacrificing their work. They don't want to work. They want to pursue more education ahead. So in such countries, even though the working age population is high, it might not convert to the working age population might not convert to a higher labor force, because a lot of people in the working age might actually prefer to go for higher education. Second reason for a low labor force participation would be a country might have a relatively larger proportion of workers. A country might have a relatively larger proportion of workers who decide to take early retirement. Who decide to take an early retirement. That means they want to retire before the age fixed by the government. They willingly retire early in life. Suppose, let's say the government has fixed the retirement age at 60 years, but someone might decide to retire at 50 years old and spend time with family. So although that person at 50 years of age still lies in the working age bracket because the retirement age is 60 years, someone who is 50 still lies in the working age bracket but willingly decides not to work, and therefore leads to a lower labor force participation. Okay, and the third factor would be contribution of women to the labor force. The third factor for a low labor force participation would be, so a country where the contribution of women in the labor force is constrained by social and cultural factors. For example, a country like India, where there was a time when women were not allowed to work. Obviously, nowadays, women are not only participating as much as men, but are also outperforming men in a lot of jobs, be it the corporate sector, be it the education sector, and so on. But there was a time in a country like India where women were not allowed to work. So even though they were in the working age bracket, but because of social pressures, society pressures, or a given culture, they were not allowed to work, which in turn led to a lower labor force participation. Okay, so these are three good reasons why the size of the working age population might be high, but the labor force participation would be low. Just because you want to pursue higher education, or you want to decide to retire early in life, or you are a woman who is not allowed to work. Okay, so hoping all students have understood this. I stop in this lesson. The objective was to introduce to all students the concept of unemployment. We have talked about economically active and economically inactive workers. We have talked about what is meant by labor force and what all it includes. We have also looked at the factors influencing a country's labor force. And the last thing we have done in this lesson is that a higher working age population may not necessarily convert to a higher labor force. Although usually a higher working age population would mean higher labor force, but not necessarily, because of these three good reasons you can see on your screen. So I stop in this lesson. In the next lesson, we are going to look at the difference between the level of unemployment and rate of unemployment. So level of unemployment versus rate of unemployment is something we are going to look at in the next lesson. So I stop in this lesson. I hope all my students have enjoyed this lesson. Any doubts, you can unmute your mics and ask. Okay. Or you can obviously get in touch with me on WhatsApp, or you can mail me your doubts at divineschoolofeconomics@gmail.com. This is where I stop in this lesson.